Today, we are venturing into the controversial world of abortion. This is a convoluted, dense, and complicated topic. There are so many factors at play in this debate: gender identity, separation of church and state, the advancement of medical procedures, access to birth control, efficacy of birth control, politics. The list goes on and on. What we're attempting to do in this episode is accurately and concisely cover the history of abortion and explain how and why its criminalization came to be. We're also going to talk about the bigger picture surrounding abortion and the ideology behind it. Why is this debate so highly contested right now, and what do we bring to the surface when we read between the lines? That's today on Social Discord. So this is really the first time we're seeing in the political landscape a full campaign to make abortion illegal.
The question was, who determines what is best for the health of the mother?
It literally, it makes it sound like an abusive relationship.
It also means, as argued by Reagan, and I agree, the abortion debate is really an ideological struggle over the position of women.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Social Discord, episode 29, Abortion and Roe v. Wade, the conservative white whale. I'm your host, Dalen Turk.
I'm Kara Tebow.
And I'm Curtis Medina.
Now, as we said after the 2022 Here's Looking at You episode, we had a heavy hitter coming your way, and here it is. We've been looking at doing this episode for a while now. We weren't sure how to go about it, but we decided to go ahead and tackle it. So here we are. Kara, Curtis, how are you feeling before we head into this?
That's heavy. Sure is heavy. Topical.
Yeah, I mean, I think you guys said it best when you said that, you know, after Texas made those kind of huge strides toward being much more conservative in the issue of abortion, that how could we not talk about it? Because it's becoming part of our daily life again, unfortunately, that it's getting kind of brought back up and politicized as much as ever, or as it ever has.
Mm-hmm. I think it's one of those things that, especially since Roe v. Wade and other such factors that and points in time that we'll discuss, it's one of those topics that is evergreen. There will always be multiple sides of it, and it will just continue to always be a debate. But with that, Kara's leading today's episode, so why don't you take us away?
Sure, thanks. So before I begin, you can take a list of our full sources used for this in the show notes, but I did want to highlight a big source that I drew for this episode. Leslie J. Reagan wrote the book When Abortion Was a Crime in 1996. It's considered one of the most comprehensive books to date and even won a President's Book Award from the Social Science History Association. So if I refer to Reagan, I am referring to the author of that book. With that, let's get started.
Reagan.
I figured I needed to clarify that so people weren't like, I'm sorry, now what did Ronald Reagan say in 1987? So no, it is Leslie Reagan. All right, so pretty much, you guys, for as long as you and I can remember, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show, our knowledge of abortion is that it's always been a contentious and a political landscape, completely blurring the lines of religion and government. But this really hasn't always been the case. At one point, and I was shocked to learn this, abortion was a very normal part of life in the United States. Services were advertised freely without any mainstream protest or backlash. And that's not to say, you know, there weren't fringe groups or folks who didn't like it, but in the mainstream conversation, there really wasn't any protest about it. In the 18th century and about until 1880, abortions were allowed under common law and widely practiced. They were only legal after quickening, which is a very subjective term used to describe when pregnant women could feel the fetus moving, and that's typically around the 4-month mark, but it was very case by case. So at conception and the earliest stage of pregnancy, before the so-called quickening, it was not a commonly held belief that human life existed. Not even the Catholic Church, if you can believe it, you guys, took this view, which was shocking to me, right? Because I think we've all thought that the Catholic Church has always had a big fight in the abortion realm. So Reagan wrote, rather, the popular ethic regarding abortion and common law were grounded in the female experience of their own bodies. So it wasn't just that abortions were not questioned or argued about, but drugs to induce abortions were a booming business. They became so popular that they took on their own term, taking the trade. Some businesses even called it the female monthly pill. So it's essentially like a monthly Plan B pill, if you will. These were advertised in newspapers. They could be bought from pharmacists. They were in storefronts. Physicians had them. You could even order them through the mail. And if the drugs didn't work, women could go visit a practitioner for a surgical procedure.
Like was this, obviously medicine back in the day was not what it is today, but was it like just like heroin pills? Like what was it, just like poison for the female body what was it?
You're onto something there, because unfortunately those pills were fatal. Maybe not frequently, but often enough that it was extremely concerning, to the point where the first conversation over governing abortion, it didn't come to play over morality. It really came into play because of the concerns on the poisoning of these pills. So the first time any law was passed in the U.S. in relation to abortion was between 1820 and 1830, and it was related to just poison control. So it wasn't a concern over, these women are getting abortions. It was a concern over, let's make this safe, which is really shocking, right? Because we can't really imagine a law in this current landscape where it's like, let's give them a safer pill. That's just not the topic right now. And it really wasn't until even the mid-19th century that abortion became a point of political fever.
Yeah, and also, in Great Britain, which we get a lot of our laws from, they did actually make a law called the Ellenborough Law. Hopefully I'm saying that right. That it influenced the U.S. to ban it. It was also based upon the idea of a lot of people were getting bad medicine that was poisoning them, killing them, and so the UK actually made it a felony in 1803, I believe.
So
which is. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dalen.
No, so it's like literally the original criminalization of abortion wasn't about the baby, the fetus. It was about the mother. Like it was about the protection of the mother. They banned it because women were getting poisoned by these pills, and it was dangerous, and it was causing fatality for the mothers. Like it seems very backwards compared to today.
But in 1857, the AMA launched a campaign to make abortion illegal. So this is really the first time we're seeing in the political landscape a full campaign to make abortion illegal. So this part of this is a professional move because they wanted to establish the supremacy of quote unquote regular physicians. There was a lot of traction with midwives and homeopaths stepping into obstetrics and gynecology, and physicians did not want that. They wanted kind of control over the field of medicine.
Interesting. So it was basically the American Medical Association, this association of doctors being like, they're taking our jobs. Let's stop that.
It was kind of just like, well, hang on. Why don't you stay over there? And like, we'll go ahead and regulate, what needs to be regulated. Mm-hmm. If you guys are going to make the business of obstetrics, into whatever you midwives are doing over there. And there's a bit more to it as well. At the same time, women were also lobbying for Harvard Medical School to accept them, partially so they could pursue obstetrics and gynecology. Obviously, it was, very relevant to them. And interestingly enough, the man behind the AMA anti-abortion campaign, his name is Dr. Horatio Storer, and he was a Harvard Medical School graduate who worked as an OBGYN. This crusade was seen now by historians and at the time by some folks as a backlash against the shifting aspirations of women. And according to Reagan, it was anti-feminist at its core. So it's really interesting to kind of go back to the beginning of abortion. We hear a lot of the debate really is about women having choices, women being able to make decisions about their body. And we can really see that from the very get-go. It was really about kind of making sure that women were in their place where they needed to be. But even more so than that, and I found this disturbing but not surprising because so many of our roots in this country kind of go back to some of this mentality, there was a much deeper motive that really lit a fire under anti-abortion leaders at the time. So before abortions were banned, the main clientele for abortion clinics were married, white, native-born Protestant women of upper and middle class. Abortions, birth control, and efforts to manage the timing of pregnancy meant that birth rates among white women were falling very quickly. And this was happening just as immigrants streamed into the United States. So suddenly there was this fear, perceived or real, of being outpopulated by quote unquote others. So Dr. Storer, our good friend Dr. Storer actually argued that whites should be populating the country, including the West and the South, better them than blacks, Catholics, Mexicans, Chinese, or Indians. He went so far as to say, shall these regions be filled by our own children or by those of aliens? This is a question our women must answer. Upon their loins depends the future destiny of the nation.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, so there's this trend
I think
on
I
the
missed
internet
that part. Yeah.
where
in the Constitution. Oh my
there's
God.
this trend where women will read like excerpts from books where it's male authors writing about women or writing about women's bodies, and it's always this just absurd, gross writing. And I'm like, this is exactly that. It's this upon their loins depends the future destiny of it. Like, come on, man.
Imagine, I can say it's hard to be a woman now, right? It's always hard to be a woman. There's a lot pushed on us in terms of what we need to be, but particularly at this time, like there's like this conversation that it is your destiny, your job to keep, a white America. Like, how does that not mess with you and make you think like, oh, this is my job, because Dr. Storer from Harvard is telling me it is.
I can't take anyone seriously that uses the word loins. Like I snicker every time. I mean that, and like when people say like that's your duty, like oh my God, I always laugh.
Yeah.
Like I can't take seriously.
It's like, all right, that's very dramatic. Calm down.
I want to.
It sounds like a freaking Shakespeare quote.
I want to point out too with this specific talking about ultimately they want to stop white women from getting abortions because that's taking white people out of the population. And if you listen to my conversation I had with Dr. Tobin Miller Shearer about critical race theory, this is such a perfect example of why critical race theory is important, because it's, abortion is one of the most polarizing debates today. I mean, it has been forever now. And once again, so much of it stems back to the way race has shaped our laws in this country, and the way race has shaped these ideologies, and it's shaped these laws, and it's shaped all this stuff. It all ties back together, like we've seen in so many of our episodes. So much of it is so intertwined, and I think it's just important to point that out with this.
That's why it's so funny when politicians, usually conservatives, are saying that they refuse to see everything through like a lens of race. It's like, but everything has been through lenses of race. I mean, up until just lately, has things even started to sort of be equal and more, and less to do with what you are than who you are.
100, and that's why I said I'm like not surprised that when we start researching any topic, it's like, oh, is it really that surprising that it ties back to, racism? I mean, really, abortion was pushed by, these groups, in addition to trying to ensure control over the medical realm or to distract women from entering the field. White male patriotism is the driving force at this time behind anti-abortion laws, and it demanded that maternity be enforced upon white women. So when we talk about women having a choice for her body, this is what we're talking. I don't care what the conversation is now. Abortion was criminalized initially, so that white women were forced to have children. It's insane.
It's exhausting.
It's so weird. I mean, it doesn't even make sense too. Like, I mean, if they banned all abortion, that's banning everyone's abortions, not just white women. So I mean, it not only is it racist and gross, but it also didn't make any logical sense even to their own means.
Oh, I think they were just like, let's keep it going. Right now we're the majority, but I mean, is there really ever any logic behind
No.
This is an emotional response, right?
Yeah.
It's a completely emotional response.
Well, I think you'll see through time, and even today, that women of color consistently have more instances of death from childbirth than white women. I mean, for example, we'll talk about it in the next episode, but I can't remember what state it was. I'll look into it more, but it was that Black women died at a rate of 4 times more frequent than white women from childbirth. And that's why they're saying that abortion rights are so important, because these underrepresented, undertreated communities of people of color just struggle so much more. So that's why, we look at this and it's like, well, if it's for everybody, well, it's because it is, but people of color are so much more negatively affected by just childbirth in itself.
Right. And we don't think about it today that, at one time when a woman got pregnant, that was a possible death sentence. It's so rare today that a woman dies from pregnancy, that we it's not like when they leave for the hospital, we're not like, hope to see you. We're like, oh, how exciting. It's a baby and all that. Yeah. But it's not like 50-50 chance or whatever, like it was at one time.
Yeah, I mean, 100%, it's nothing near that, but it's still so terrifying for so many women. And it is still so, it's not just death, it's complications from preeclampsia, from high blood pressure, from this horrible depressive episodes that can happen, after having a baby. And so I think even some people don't realize how terrified women are to be pregnant and to have a baby. It's a massive medical procedure is what it is. And it's inherently risky no matter what. So it is, when we talk about forcing people to have babies, you're forcing them to undergo a very risky medical procedure. When you think about it like that, it's a little bit disturbing as well. So, I mean, ultimately, this campaign was successful, as we know. Most states restricted abortions by 1880, and as the issue became politicized, the Catholic Church came in. They kind of changed they fully changed their position from being okay with it, having no dog in the fight, to being like, okay, actually, in 1869, we're going to start condemning it. And then in 1895, they condemned abortion even to save a woman's life.
Wow.
So,
do either of you know, does the Bible say anything about abortion in itself? I really have no idea.
I am not a biblical scholar. From the book I read, it did say, from the author's perspective of the book that I read, which was the pro-life / choice debate, is Historical Guide to the Controversial Issues in America by Mark Herring. He said that the Bible was unquestionably pro-life over everything, not just with abortion, but basically that life meant everything. And that anything that got in the way, including, something like a contraceptive or something like that, not that was invented yet, but anything by those means that would stop life in any way was bad, because at the time, you needed to be fruitful and multiply. On the farm, you needed to have, as many children as you could so that you could have free labor, essentially. And that, became less and less important later on with urbanization. And that's why abortion became more common in cities versus in the rural areas, and more accepted in cities than in the rural areas. But as far as specifically things that are mentioned in the Bible, I don't have the specific proverbs or whatever. I didn't write that down, even though I did mention it. But he did say that it was definitely not ambiguous, as some have claimed that the Bible was, especially the Old Testament, was very against anything that would cause a baby not to be born.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay.
And that barrenness, quote, barrenness and widowhood were told to be pitied. Abortion was condemned. I know, I'm not saying this is right. I'm just saying it's what the Bible supposedly says. And that some argue that in the Bible there are moments where people ask God to sort of not let the baby come to be. I don't think they specifically say to abort it, but they're asking God, they're saying, this is too much for me. God, can you please not let this baby happen? Mm-hmm. And so some interpret that as being an abortion, and that could be a sign that God is okay with it if it's too hard on the situation of the family. But
interesting.
I think that's kind of a stretch. I think in general it's a no-no in the Bible.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So when there's only one more law I kind of wanted to mention, and Dalen's going to do a really great deep dive for us into current laws on abortions, but one notable law was in 1873. It's called the Comstock Law, and it was passed by Congress, and it essentially banned items including abortion drugs and basically anything on the topic sent by mail. So there was no, marketing, so to speak, of folks who were giving these abortions out or who were still practicing abortions in their clinics.
Do you guys remember the other time that the Comstock Law came up in one of our episodes?
Why did it sound so familiar?
It came up in the episode about queer history. It's what they were arresting people for sending out.
For sending like gay magazines?
It was a gay magazine. Right. It was a gay magazine that they were opening people's mail. And when they found something that they thought at the time was obscene, they would arrest the person. So it was like literally the post office arresting people.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I was like reading this. I was like, it sounds really familiar. Oh my gosh.
It's
crossover
funny,
episode.
Because Kara, when you just said that, I'm pretty sure I just had the same reaction as that episode where in my mind, I'm like, they're going to arrest people for getting stuff in the mail? Like, I keep saying this, but like so many episodes, we find all this intertwined stuff, and it's absurd.
It's ways of control, and it's what's funny is like a lot of conservatives, they might be anti-abortion, they might be anti-gay, and so they're like they have to like defend things like this, but it's also like so like creepy that the government would have so much control over everything that you read or that you do. It's very anti-conservative movement as we're told it stands.
It's like a panic. Like you're in such a panic and so much fear over what's going on that you can't control because you don't like it for one reason or another, that you're going to start opening people's mail. Like to me, that just screams like I'm not in control of the situation and you guys are all going to listen to me.
That's true. Well, and it's also, it says maybe we shouldn't live so much in the moment where, we think that just because something is considered obscene or not, the mainstream today, that it won't be tomorrow, or that, we could be wrong because we have been wrong so many times in the past about things that we look back at now and like, what? Like what? Women couldn't wear pants? Like what? Just ridiculous stuff that at the time was like, I can't believe she's showing, her ankle or something, something ridiculous.
Yeah. And also just remembering too, that what we might find on the flip side of that too, like what we find as like contentious today wasn't always like abortion.
Which is absolutely
just wild.
Can I say this thing real quick about Anne?
Yeah, I was going to ask, what's this about?
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so she was a really interesting figure at this time, and it goes directly into the Comstock Law thing because so she was actually known more to the public as Madame Rastell.
I like that.
I instantly I never saw a picture of her, but I instantly see like a Dolly Parton-esque from Whorehouse in Texas, very
totally.
Feather boa around her shoulders and
thank you. Nothing dirty going on. So anyway, Madame Rastell. So she was one of the reasons that the Comstock Law was enacted, and it actually was her undoing because she was advertising abortions in the New York Sun and the Boston Daily Times. She opened up clinics in Boston and Philadelphia by 1845. And she was mega successful. I mean, it is hard to overstate how successful that she was in doing this. She was sought after by lots and lots of people. I believe that they said that she did it on a sliding scale, so people who were rich could pay. I think they said it was like $2,500 per person or something like that. It was something outrageous. And then if you didn't have the money, she would also help those people as well. She had no medical knowledge, but she did learn her trade, and as far as I know, she was very how do I put this? Professional, I guess. It wasn't necessarily the back alley thing that we hear about. She was one of the ones that supposedly did it really well, and that's why she got such a great name for being the person to go to. At the time, the Presbyterian Church heard about her, but actually blamed the newspapers for the money that they were making off of advertising for her, and basically saying, quote, "It is less criminal to kill the child before birth than to curse them with an unwelcome existence." So it was essentially a pro-abortion, pro-choice quote from the Presbyterian Church at that time. And I don't have a lot about what took her down, although it did talk about it in the book, but it was to do with the Comstock law. And she did get some time, I believe, in jail. And then when she got out of, actually ended up killing herself. So that
my goodness.
ended really sadly. But for a while she was very well known. Like you said, very out in the open. I mean, literally advertising the newspaper. So it definitely was not considered the same taboo as it is.
And there are so many instances of amazing women like this or organizations that existed prior to it becoming criminalized, but then a lot of them popped up underground after it was banned. So I mean, we know what happens when abortions are banned. This is something that we talk about a lot. This is something that, abortion advocates remind us of a lot. Just because it's banned does not mean it's going to stop. In fact, some late 19th century observers estimated that 2 million abortions were performed annually, which means that in Victorian America, the number of abortions per capita was like 7 or 8 times as high as it is today.
Wow.
So criminalizing it didn't work. It really just started going on behind closed doors and in private practices. Providers at the time were still, passing out business cards, clinics were open, and male doctors especially, they knew that women chose the doctors who would attend their whole families through, many lucrative illnesses. So they kind of had this self-interest and a compassion and a motive for making sure that women knew that they were the ones to go to for abortions. And still at this time, I mean, it became criminalized, but unless a woman died, which of course they were doing so mostly in the hands of trying to procure these abortions themselves, but also with doctors, it was rare for an arrest or conviction to take place. I mean, even with midwives, whom doctors continued to try to drive out of business as, calling them dangerous and whatever, quacks, they were still also able to kind of perform abortions mostly in peace. So if they were going to criminalize it right away, I was kind of wondering, like, why would they make it illegal? If they were going to kind of let it go on behind the scenes. If nobody's going to be persecuted or face legal repercussions, then why go through all this trouble to make it difficult for women to access safe abortions and to prohibit poor women, especially, from getting a medical professional to do this? So Reagan in her book argues, and so do a lot of abortion historians, that at the time, the main purpose was ultimately to expose and humiliate women caught in raids on abortion clinics or brought to the hospital with abortion complications. They really wanted to send a message to women about the consequences of challenging their role as a woman, their duty to guard their loins or whatever it was, to take up the cross of populating America. I mean, there was just so much hatred and contempt for these women. In 1902, the editors of the Journal of the American Medical Association, Medical Association, which is an extremely prestigious and well-read medical journal, they endorsed the common policy of denying a woman suffering from abortion complications medical care until she, quote unquote, confessed to whoever the father was and named any medical personnel who attempted to help her. Like, that's insane. This was supported by these medical doctors. And this, in the late 20s, there was about some 15,000 women a year who died from abortions, particularly because they were having care withheld from them unless they sold people out.
Oh, wow. That's crazy. Also, we should definitely mention that in the 1920s, penicillin was invented, and it took a while for it to actually get going. But around in the 40s, it actually dropped the fatality rate from abortion because what was happening before that was women were getting infections from both, how do I say it, from both abortions done in proper settings but especially from them having it in improper settings.
Right.
It's fascinating the language that you use through here, Kara. like the consequences and challenging their role and the humiliation and making them confess, and just the amount of manipulation and mind games that are played. It literally it makes it sound like an abusive relationship.
It does. It really does.
It's the same language, it's the same stuff, and it just the demeaning nature that they had towards these women, it just sounds like an abusive relationship.
You're so right. And it's the contempt for women who wanted to do anything other than have children, or even, God forbid, if they were like, yeah, this pregnancy is not going so well, I don't want to carry this out because I'm scared. It's like, well, then you should be humiliated because you're failing as a woman.
Yeah.
Like, how do you overcome that type of societal pressure? And I totally also kind of got that vibe. It's like America was in an abusive relationship with women of the country.
Well, and it's so unfair too, because at the time, like a married woman was just expected to give in to the man's sexual desire whenever he wanted, like without question, and yet it was still considered their responsibility when they had a child and it wasn't convenient for the couple. So how is it her fault in any of this?
And I don't even think it's so much that they have to, and like, of course, obviously, like, the man, he needs his sex and whatever, but I also think it's so much more than just the man, like a man wanting sex. It's like we keep saying, it's women had that role and that was their purpose, and men oftentimes treated them because that was their purpose. So even aside from the sexual pleasure of it, and Curtis, we were talking before about the whoever the doctor was that kind of started talking about sex for the pleasure rather than the necessity for the first time. But even aside from the sexual pleasure, that was just the role. That was what women were used for, for childbearing.
It was Marquis de Sade, and a book described him as a nobleman, politician, and writer. And that basically he was the one who popularized first that sex was not just for procreation, but could also be for pleasure. And the problem that the church had with a lot of that is that if people were having sex just for pleasure, there would be a lot of unwanted children from it. So I guess before this, like, people only had sex when they wanted a kid, so marriage was really boring or something. I don't get it, but at least in the mainstream, up to that point, and I think it was in the 1800s when he first wrote it, that was like a big deal that somebody said, hey, how about sex just for fun?
What a shocking revelation.
The original Dr. Ruth, right?
Yeah. I think there's a TV show based on him, actually, called like Sex.
Appropriately named.
Called Sex.
It's Sex something, and I unless I'm like hallucinating, it's a TV show that kind of goes into his work and then goes into like the contributions he made to society and like the type of like studies that were going on, how controversial it was. I remember watching a couple episodes of the first of the show, and I was like, oh, this is good. No, I'm glad you guys made those points because it's so true. And also, let us not forget that a woman cannot get pregnant without a man unless a man ejaculates. So, 100% of all pregnancies are caused by a man doing something. So, whatever.
Well, and that's true. And art, like something that I have never read anywhere is, what about the cases where the husband doesn't want the baby? Like let's say the wife is, I don't know, let's say she's conflicted or something, but the husband's really the one that, says, we can't feed another mouth right now, like you have to get rid of it. Like there has to be cases where the man is not on board.
I mostly hear about that not only anecdotally, but in popular culture, in literature, as men then doing something to the women that they're with. Surely there was obviously loving spouses who wanted to find a safe way to abort, the pregnancy. But a lot of times what we do hear about is men getting very irritated that the woman got pregnant and punching her in the stomach or throwing her down the stairs. This is unfortunately quite common. and especially in domestic abuse relationships. But that was one way that men dealt with it.
I want to point out kind of the other side of the coin too, though, and I think it's in recent years it's become more of a conversation of what defines masculinity. What men don't cry, this kind of a thing. So I can't help but imagine that there were a number of men where it's an unplanned pregnancy and they felt obligated by societal norms to father the child, and so
that kid.
Just as much as what a woman may want an abortion for, they're not ready, whatever reason it may be. I think it's also a case where men were, forced, whatever. Men also felt obligated due to the social norms of the time that there is a baby, I have to father it no matter what. This is my role as a man in the society.
Yeah, and you have to have the 2.5 kids or whatever, to pass on your family name.
Mm-hmm.
So, unsurprisingly, right, we tend to see abortions really surge with economic uncertainty for obvious reasons, right? If the economy is really, really bad, you want to be responsible and not bring a child into the world. So during the Depression, and especially when women stood to lose their jobs if they married or had a child and they needed to be working, we saw this surge in abortion rates. And so remember, this is after it's illegal, but even at the time, some medical clinics actually had printed papers in the office for post-abortion follow-up, instructions ready to go. There were also birth control clubs, which sounds so fun, by the way, where members would pay into a collective fund, basically like health insurance, and draw abortion fees from it as needed. So this is still going on after it's criminalized. It was really in the 1940s and the 1950s. And so that's quite a while, right, after it was criminalized, right, that organized medicine and the law combined forces to fully crack down on safe abortion methods. And women started seeking out much more these back alley procedures or took matters into their own hands. It's not pretty, but some of that looked like inserting knitting needles and coat hangers into themselves, drinking chemicals or douching with chemicals. These are extremely dangerous and frequently led to serious injury or death. And even for, privileged white women who could sometimes still get away with private insurance and quote unquote therapeutic abortions in which their lives were in danger, but really, that was like the doctor being like, yeah, wink, wink, all right, that your life was in danger. Even their options really became pretty much dried up completely. Before Roe v. Wade, abortions pretty much completely went underground, and services were set up at a great risk to the provider. So, Curtis, like you were talking about, Madame Rastell. Rastell, yes. So these women and these providers and these concerned people were starting to set up these facilities underground. There was even concerned pastors and rabbis. They were setting up clergy consultation services on abortion to help women find safe illegal abortions. There was actually an underground abortion service established by feminists in Chicago. It was called the Abortion Counseling Service of the Chicago Women's Liberation Union, and it helped provide these safe, supportive, and affordable illegal abortions. It's estimated that actually between 1969 and 1973, the members of just that group helped provide more than 11,000 safe abortions at great risk to themselves, right? Like all these people are putting themselves at risk.
Why do you think they thought, all these different people from all these different walks of life, why do you think they thought it was so important to do this at such a risk to themselves? I think to people who are on the fence about this or maybe even against abortion, they're just like, well, why can't people just stop having them or whatever? Like what do you think is the common thread that makes people feel like this is an absolute right and an absolute necessity in our society? That can't be pushed down.
I know what I think, and I think that's because women they're going to do it anyway. If a woman wants an abortion, she will, and she really wants it, she's going to try to find a way to do it. Like we were saying, with sticking a coat hanger up into herself, or if her life is at risk. And I think people were compassionate to that, and probably some people were compassionate to the fact that if a woman is pregnant and she's going to bring in a unwanted baby into the world, or B, a baby who will not be supported because there are no social safety nets and she can't provide for them, surely there was some compassion, understanding that, especially from these religious leaders, that is it better to, with that quote that you'd read earlier, Curtis, to bring a child into this world unwanted, or, where it won't be provided for, or is it better to terminate the pregnancy?
There seems to be some. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dale.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think it's important to look at the historical context of this fight for pro-choice. When you look at a group like, women, all in all, that for, so long throughout history have been pushed underneath the just the pounding fist of white men, like when it's just one more thing of, regardless of, if you're pro-life, pro-choice of the baby, but just another thing that is controlling something that is literally your body in your body. Like if I was in those shoes, like I can't help but imagine I would do everything I could to fight to get rid of this one thing that is controlling, my body, regardless of another life involved or not. After history of, after just hundreds of years of control and damnation, like, I would absolutely feel like I would want control
too.
over
Like, I think
myself.
it's very natural for someone to want control of their body, and the idea of bodily autonomy, that makes a lot of sense no matter who you are.
Yeah, and like I said, Dalen, let's look at the history of it. The reason at the time that abortions were pushed, it was not because the church was pushing it. It was because they wanted women to have babies, and they wanted them to stay out of the, the medical world, and they wanted them to keep producing. Like, at the end of the day, that makes me panic to think about. And so, of course, there's going to be this inherent, desire to push back against that. And even, I know that there's a lot of men who support abortion rights activists, but I know for myself, I live in Texas, and I am on several lists to, and you can sue me if you want, Texas, to help women that need an abortion. My name is on that list to help contact people to help get them out of state, to help get them transportation out of state. And because I feel so strongly for these women and the panic they're experiencing, and I just can't, I hate the idea of someone forcing them to bear children. That is terrifying. It really is. So I appreciate the compassion that comes out around that.
Yeah, and it comes back to, for devil's advocate, someone would say if they didn't want that child, they, should have been abstinent. They should have used protection. They should have whatever, And so it's I don't know. There just seems to be such a lack of understanding of what it really means, like, in my mind.
I was going to mention the statistic later, but in 2014, and this is a pretty common statistic that we see, 51%, over half of the women who got pregnant and wanted abortions, they were on birth control. Birth control doesn't always work. It does not work. So unless you're telling people to be 100% abstinent, which, by the way, boring, then you can't just tell me, oh, be careful. Like, things happen. Your birth control fails, or a guy doesn't, takes off the condom and doesn't tell you, or all these other things. So, like, blah, 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 that argument, bye, out the window. I hate it. I hate when people mention
it definitely is not just, it's not a lack of concern from women. No. Most women I've known have been very, like, on it as far as, like, using protection and using the pill. What are those things called?
IUD.
IUDs?
What was it?
IUDs?
Yeah. Using those. And so, like, I have never known, I can't think of any women I've ever known that were just like, like, we'll just see what happens. I mean, in the book I was reading, it did say that that I think it was from I can't remember if it was from this one or it was from the Turnaway study, but it was saying that, a lot of people get pregnant because they don't think it will happen to them, because the likelihood of actually getting pregnant from a single act of sex was like 3% or something like that. And that it really had to, it had to depend exactly on when they had sex, if it was I think 6 days before they were ovulating, and that if it wasn't in that time, or if it was during that time, it was like 20%. And if it was any other time, it was like essentially zero. Like the chances were really wrong that it was unlikely. But then when it happens and that lightning strikes, oh my God, what do I do? Abortion might be your only option.
Totally. And there's also a significant portion of women, I have friends at my age who have been told before, you're infertile, and if you did by some act of God get pregnant, it would not be a safe pregnancy for you, or all these things. And so like if you're told that, not really that worried about it. And also I think at the end of the day, all that to say, even if a woman wasn't careful, if she wasn't on birth control, like maybe try to do better next time. But that doesn't mean that, she's not entitled, in my opinion, to, the same abortion rights as somebody who, say, was quote unquote careful. But talked about kind of the pre-criminalization of abortion. We talked about how it really wasn't enforced for a while. And then when the crackdown happened, people went underground with them. People were doing things in, the euphemism that we hear a lot, back alley abortions. But then, of course, there were services that were trying to help on the down low. And by the time we arrived in 1970 and Roe v. Wade kind of getting there, the criminalization and gender structure around abortion were really being challenged, and they were starting to crumble. Feminists really pushed the idea of what it means to be a woman, and they kind of started projecting the motherhood titles that were, again, forced upon them. Various states at this point had tried to implement clauses that allowed for abortion in cases of rape, incest, or when the mother's life is in danger. We kind of hear the argument a lot. But this wasn't enough, because most women, and it continues to be the case today, they're seeking abortions for economic, social, or personal reasons. And illegal abortions really just continue to thrive, even amongst these exemption laws. And I think one thing I do want to point out is that illegal just didn't always mean unsafe. I mean, oftentimes it was, but it also meant that illegal sometimes meant that medical professionals were quietly performing these procedures, either as a moral offering or because it was lucrative. So it's not all just coat hanger abortions. It's that there's just this frantic need to find it anywhere you can, and sometimes that meant getting access to a safe illegal abortion. But for women without means, a lot of times that meant not having access to that.
Have either of you either read or watched the movie Cider House Rules?
Yeah.
Yeah, Kara, I implore you to watch it or read the book. It's the movie. It's Tobey Maguire, Michael Caine, Delroy Lindo, just Paul Rudd, Charlize Theron. It's an incredible movie, story about Michael Caine, who runs an orphanage, and he runs illegal, or he performs illegal abortions in this orphanage. And Tobey Maguire is someone who attended the orphanage and was never adopted, so he becomes a 20-something-year-old, and he basically studies under Michael Caine's character and learns how to perform these abortions. And it's just on top of it's covered in racial undertones and all this stuff in the story, but it's a very good illustration of what we're talking about. It tells the story quite well.
That sounds that's on my list now. Can you say one more time what it's called?
It's Cider House Rules.
Okay.
And basically it's
my list.
Watch it, read
and
the book.
And it's about the rules in the cider house. It's not saying that the cider house rules, which I thought that's what it meant before watching the movie.
Yes. And when Curtis says the rules in the cider house, you will understand when you watch the movie.
I'm so stupid. That literally is what I thought. when I watched it. I really did. Can we talk a little bit about Roe v. Wade?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, go for it.
the reason that I think we really have to understand Roe v. Wade and everything that led up to it right now in our history is because due to the conservative court that was put on by Donald Trump. The thinking is that Roe v. Wade, which was the key legislation that led to abortion becoming legalized, has the most chance of being either removed completely or at least reduced to a point of it essentially going backwards to a place where legal abortions would not exist. So you've probably heard about Roe v. Wade, and people talk about it a lot as being the most controversial decision the Supreme Court ever made. And you probably are a little sick of it, honestly. but in the research that I did for this, I was surprised by how much I didn't know. So let me jump into that. So basically, what led to Roe v. Wade? Well, it had been going on forever. Estimated 100 to 200,000 abortions were performed illegally during the pre-legal abortion time period. Was that per year? I think that's what you said, right, Kara? That was per year, 100,000.
Well, at the time in like the Victorian America, they were
Oh, you were talking about earlier.
2 million actually a year. Now,
oh my gosh.
Yeah. Now we see a fluctuation. Right now, it's about 860,000 a year.
Okay.
That's legal. That's what we're talking about with those numbers.
Gotcha. Okay. So according to this, between 100 and 200,000 abortions were being performed each year. It did say that that the pro-choice people had lied about the numbers being up to 1 million at the time when Roe v. Wade was being legislated, but that it was exaggerated and that since then that number had been taken down. But I think it's still kind of up for debate. In the 1950s, there was a drug being given to mothers called Thalidomide, and it was to curb morning sickness caused during pregnancy, but it actually had a really horrifying side effect where it was frequently causing birth defects in children, things like causing blindness, causing limbs not to be formed, and mothers who took this medication at certain portions in their pregnancy, the risk was thought to be 50-50 as to whether or not their children would have these abnormalities or handicaps.
Wow.
So there was a high-profile abortion case that came about with this woman who was said to have had a 50% chance, and she actually did an interview in a newspaper to warn other mothers not to take this. And somehow her name leaked out and it got national attention because she was the host of a show called Romper Room, which I've heard about. I think the book said that it was a localized version of it, which I don't really understand what that means out of Arizona. But essentially, she became famous because she was the host of a children's show, and she wanted to get an abortion because she didn't want her child dealing with the repercussions of this horrible disease. So that was the first time that in the mainstream, I'm not sure if it was just in the newspapers or if it was, like exactly how they were gauging this, but according to the book, it was the first time the mainstream were 50-50 on the issue of choice versus anti-abortion. And I do want to say too that, the terms pro-life and pro-choice, like they're perfect in one way because nobody is really saying that more abortions would be good, but just that they're necessary, and that one side is fighting for the choice of it and one is fighting against the choice. But it's not to say that people who are pro-choice are anti-life or people who are pro-life are necessarily anti-choice, but they just don't think that it should be in the hands of people or whatever.
Yeah, nobody is pro-death. And no one is pro-death,
Right.
And I find myself saying this a lot where it's no one wants to get an abortion. Like right. No one is like, I want an abortion. No, like it's always, I need an abortion.
It's not an easy decision for anyone. Right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And I think that's a good place to start, when people of opposing views are talking about this is to understand that like some people feel this is a necessity, but nobody's happy about it. Like this is not a happy day in their life.
No.
So finally there was a case against the director of a Planned Parenthood in Connecticut. This was in the 60s. And this case got brought to, I believe it was the Connecticut Supreme Court. I always get a little confused when they say Supreme Court, like if it means that state or if it's the national one, but I believe it was Connecticut State Court. And Justice William O. Douglas delivered the opinion of the court in 1965 that Estelle T. Griswold, the arrested director of the Planned Parenthood, had been denied privacy with her patient who was seeking an abortion. At the time, she was charged with aiding and abetting through medical counsel a crime in that state. But Justice Douglas famously saw that the Constitution had, quote, specific guarantees in the Bill of Rights that are Penumbras, Penumbras, which is essentially shadows in the Bill of Rights formed by emanations that were essentially rays of sun that kind of could shine through these shadows from those guarantees that help give them life and substance. So essentially what this guy was saying was, for the first time ever, he said that the cases on abortion had no real basis in the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. Rather, one could think of the Constitution as a living document capable of being interpreted by the times in which it now existed. So this is sort of like, this is a big battle between, say, libertarians and others that, it's a difference between seeing the Constitution as exactly what it is. It can never change. It can never update. It can never apply to something that didn't exist at the time, or changing views could never have any any bearing on what we should do with the Constitution. That basically it is, most people in the libertarian view think it's just a firm statement and never can change. This was one of the first times, or maybe the first time, that set a legal precedent where basically this justice said, because this isn't specifically in the Constitution, we need to sort of apply it to what makes sense to the majority of people now at the time, and sort of go forward with doing the most good. So rather than figure out original intent alone of the Constitution, the idea was that he would apply this and that there was some idea of privacy in the Constitution, even though privacy wasn't specifically mentioned as a protection. That certainly there was some place for privacy in our country. So by the end of the 60s, 28 states had changed or loosened their abortion laws. At first, it was Colorado's legalization in cases of the health for the mother, but then it expanded beyond that into places like New York. And the problem was the health of the mother was a really vague term, and the question was, who determines what is best for the health of the mother? Who would be better than the doctor, say, or even the woman herself? So the health of the mother, well-being of the mother, sort of opened itself up to everything, and so then other states started doing similar things, and it kind of opened up this big balloon of, when should abortions be allowed, and should it only be in the most strict of cases where, rape or incest is involved, or should there be a wider understanding of what the health of the mother is, and when we should allow this? How free should it be? There was another case where California ignored its own state law and exonerated a doctor named Belous, Belous, who gave advice of which doctor a woman should go to get an abortion in Mexico. And so he was arrested for that, but then exonerated by California, even though there was a law that said that you couldn't aid and abet. And another case in D.C., somebody was exonerated, Baird, Baird, which was accused of giving a woman a contraceptive foam, which was illegal to give to anyone who was not married. Crazy. So the law basically said that you could give contraceptives to married people, but not to single people.
I'm very curious as to what a contraceptive
ridiculous.
foam
Yeah.
is.
So that, yeah, like, it's one of those like reasonings that like somebody was like, haha, if they can't have contraceptives, then they won't be having sex. Like,
We not only
you're a
want
genius.
to control your body and your pregnancies, but we also want to control when and you can and cannot have sex.
Right. I mean, and who's not going to have sex because of that? I mean, that's just, it's so stupid.
Beyond.
So suddenly, because of these cases, the burden of proving health or ill health fell upon the prosecution, which was the anti-abortionists. So in other words, could they prove that having an abortion was bad, or not, or not having an abortion was somehow helpful to them? Mm-hmm. And they couldn't, and because it's not. But whatever. So then we finally get to Roe v. Wade, the case itself. 1969, Norma McCorvey, which at the time, by the way, was a pseudonym they called her Roe because she didn't want to be known at the time. I believe she came out later and actually changed some things about her stances that went more towards the pro-life side. I didn't read a lot about that, but it did mention in the book that there were some things that she regretted in the case. But at the time, her name was Norma McCord. She was a pregnant single mom, complained that having another child would create an undue hardship, and that on her and her children. And so these two recent graduates of University of Texas took the case on, and later a physician named James Halford added his name as a plaintiff because he was also facing prosecutions for performing abortions.
So Curtis, before you kind of dive into what Roe v. Wade was, I want to talk about another factor that led up to it a bit. And you mentioned that New York was one of the first. I think you mentioned that New York was one of the first states to decriminalize abortion. If you didn't, they were, without restrictions prior to 24 weeks of pregnancy in 1970. So thousands of wealthy women would just go to New York to take advantage of the clean, safe abortions. But of course, poor women, like the woman we were just talking about, that they couldn't afford to travel or whatever, they were stuck with, again, these unsafe abortion methods. And so this was also a huge reason that this argument was pushed into the limelight, because this was such a blatant public legal unfairness that was completely shoved into basically the courts. People were saying, this is ridiculous. You have rich women traveling to access this, but if you can't travel to New York or, one of these states that allows it, then you're shit out of luck. And so this also really pushed, the same doctors that pushed originally for criminalization, so the AMA and the civil liberty lawyers and grassroots campaigns, to hop onto this train of, Roe v. Wade, and to say, look, you have to do something to figure out this glaring injustice.
It was inequality. I mean, exactly. Why is it okay but not okay in New Jersey, or something like that?
Exactly. So I just wanted to mention that was, compounding what was going on. People were outraged about the fact that only wealthy women could legally essentially access abortion.
Right. And sadly, it's kind of what's becoming, again, true today, with the Texas ban, for example. It's much easier if you live in California to have control over your own body than if you live in Texas or a place like that.
Exactly. Sorry, keep going.
So yes, it was great bunch of notes there. No, for sure. Let's see. So if you don't know, Roe v. Wade was the case that made abortion legal in the country. It did go toward the Roe side, which was arguing that it had broken her constitutional rights to have an abortion, or to more specifically for the privacy between her and her doctor. Essentially, the country telling, or the government telling her that coming into her life and telling her that this was not right. It was a landmark 1973 case. It was actually the first case to be taken to the Supreme Court, to the highest court. Now today, every state has at least one abortion clinic. However, individual states, because of Roe v. Wade, can regulate and limit the use of abortion, and many have created something called trigger laws, which would make abortion essentially illegal if Roe were overturned. 8 states, including Alabama, including 8 states of Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Michigan, Mississippi, Oklahoma, West Virginia, and Wisconsin, still have unenforced pre-Roe abortion bans in their laws that could be enforced if Roe is someday overturned. So it's a huge deal right now, as the more conservative court is planning to take up an issue that could totally undo this. So it's very topical right now.
Well, and like you just said, it's also access. And currently, more than 80% of the U.S. counties have no abortion providers at all.
That's amazing.
So, like, it's
Wow.
like, right, like you're saying, like, they're kind of making it so that in some states actually only have 2 in the entire state. So they're kind of making it like, okay, maybe it's not illegal, but we're going to make sure you can't access it as well.
Right. And I don't want to scare anyone out there, but there is a lot of talk that the Roe v. Wade case itself was done on some shaky footing. Not that necessarily the reasoning behind it is wrong. You know, there might be a case that gives it, that strengthens it and does it in a different way. But even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that while she agreed with the outcome of Roe v. Wade, that she didn't like the legal arguments that reasoned it out. Statistics show that reports about abortions being done in bad conditions were exaggerated, according to this book, and that some 85% of abortions pre-Roe decision was done in sanitary conditions. Now, what that exactly means, I don't. Death from illegally done abortions had dropped steadily since the peak of the 40s when penicillin was added, and the main argument in favor of Roe, the pro-choice side, is that when something is legalized, it can be controlled and standardized, ending many methods which may have led to the deaths and self-mutilation of women. 4 states had legalized abortions prior to Roe: Washington, Alaska, Hawaii, and New York, though 13 states, it was legal in cases of fetal viability, rape, incest, and the health of the mother. So it definitely was, much like, say, marijuana today, becoming an issue that could not be ignored for personal reasons, like you pointed out, Kara, with people saying, "Hey, this does not make any sense. This is unfair," and also from the state perspective of states being like, this is what we think, and then other states saying this is what we think. Like, we need a bigger court to sort of tell us, how to proceed. So there was also at this time an outbreak of German measles, which, if you're pregnant, cause such things as blindness, severe mental retardation. And if Roe v. Wade hadn't been the case, there were also 70 criminal and civil cases at the time that could have also been taken up and could have also made this change. So I think it was sort of luck of the draw in a way that this case was chosen. So Roe attacked the statutes of Texas law of not giving women the right to privacy in her own health and well-being, which is in the 4th Amendment, and the right of, quote, personal liberty, end quote, in the 14th Amendment. And I was going to ask you both about this. I've never read the Constitution all the way through. I have always just seen snippets of it. Do you guys know if the 14th Amendment, is that applying to bodily autonomy? Is that specifically about this idea of personal liberty? Is that sort of what that means?
So the 14th Amendment is an amendment to the United States Constitution that was adopted in 1868. It granted citizenship and equal civil and legal rights to African Americans and enslaved people who had been emancipated after the Americans. So equal civil and legal rights. I think with the 14th Amendment, personal liberties were a part of it. And I think what they're arguing here, in my mind, is by taking away her ability to choose what she does with her body, that is infringing on her personal liberties.
Okay.
It's also, this is what I found in terms of abortion, it's that the due process clause of the 14th Amendment provides a fundamental right to privacy, which protects a woman's liberty to choose whether to have an abortion.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
Which I don't fully understand, but that I guess that's how
as
they're interpreting it
as
in
Curtis
court.
said earlier, he is not a biblical scholar, nor are we
We're-
constitutional scholars.
Yeah, if you are a biblical or constitutional scholar, like that might be a good person to have on the show. So
Yep.
write in.
Maybe we can just do an entire episode just explaining the entire Constitution.
I'm down. I am so down.
It'd be fascinating.
So at the time, the justices argued that criminal abortion laws evolved for three reasons: Victorian concerns to discourage illicit sexual conduct, abortion as a haphazard medical procedure, and the state's interest in protecting prenatal life. So as we already mentioned, abortion had become safer over time and was considered more and more a normal procedure and something that was not considered super dangerous. So that part was already dying out by the time. And the illicit sexual thing was more of a religious argument and did not pertain to a country that was founded both by religious people and non-secular people. So that couldn't be used. And then so it kind of came down to the idea of protecting prenatal life or not. So it came down to this idea of when is a person a person. Could prenatal life be considered a person in and of themselves, and if so, at what point would you even start that? From a scientific or even just like an outside perspective versus just kind of a guess.
Right.
And Fourth Amendment mentions the word person 3 times. The first, in defining citizen, speaks of, quote, persons born or naturalized in the United States, end quote. The word also appears both in the Due Process Clause and in the Equal Protection Clause. Person is used in other places in the Constitution in the listing of qualifications for representatives and senators, in the Apportionment Clause, in the Migration and Importation Provision, and in the Emoluments Clause. But in nearly all these instances, the use of the word is such that it has application only postnatally. None indicates with any assurances that it has any possible prenatal application. So that was a huge blow for these laws that were aiming to protect life before it's born, before it's a person. That you couldn't just assign it personhood from conception, because there's no way to figure out when that actual life started, when consciousness starts. Mm-hmm. It is important to mention that the reason that there have been so many laws made since the passing of of Roe v. Wade is that in Roe v. Wade, they specifically left open a door that said that states had the right to regulate the procedure in ways that are reasonably related to maternal health and are subsequent to viability. The state, and if they're subsequent to viability, the state may, if it chooses, regulate and even prescribe or limit abortion, except where it is necessary in appropriate medical judgment for the preservation of the life or health of the mother. So it definitely laid out that the states had an interest in it, and it mentioned that. But later on, it was defined a little bit more narrowly that health could include of the mother could include things like financial health, mental health. Mm-hmm. And so it was defined a little bit more as it went on. But Roe v. Wade itself left open a lot for states to figure out. Some judges did dissent at the time. Byron White said that he didn't agree that women should be able to take the life simply because of convenience, in his words, family planning, embarrassment of legitimacy, etc. He thought a woman shouldn't be allowed an abortion without reason pertaining to her health. Justice Rehnquist argued that the court left the 14th Amendment more confused than they found it. But the court, by some, was deemed to have invented the right to abortion out of thin air. He argued that the 14th Amendment was not as malleable because at the time, abortion laws were already in the books, and if they had intended it to apply to an abortion, then that they would have done it back then. So that was the people who disagreed with it. But it is also really interesting to point out that the vote for Roe was actually 7-2 in favor of legalizing abortions, or allowing abortions to happen. So 7-2, and only 3 of those judges were considered to be liberal. They were appointed by liberal presidents. All of the other ones were appointed by Republicans, some as far back as I believe it was from the 30s or something like that.
Wow.
Somewhere it was really far back. And 4 of them were actually appointed by Nixon. 3 of the appointees that Nixon had put on there voted for Roe, and only 1 dissented. So at the time, even though it was controversial to the country, to the Supreme Court, it was a slam dunk, 7-2.
Wow, that's fascinating.
It's also important to remember that the Roe v. Wade decision did not declare an unqualified constitutional right to abortion. Rather, the right protects the woman from unduly burdensome interference with her freedoms to decide whether to terminate her pregnancy. It implies no limitation on the authority of a state to make a value judgment favoring childbirth over abortion, and to implement that judgment by the allocation of public funds. It was the case right after it, Doe versus Bolton, that narrowed that a little bit more, where it basically. It was about this woman in Georgia who said that she was on hard financial times. She sued because she's been denied an abortion, because in Georgia at the time, the law, it can only happen for, quote, grave, permanent, and irredeemable physical and mental need. The court decided ultimately that financial stress and the stress of fatherless children met the criteria, after all, for abortion to be therapeutic and necessary. Under this ruling, it was hard to say that any abortion wasn't needed or unnecessary. And so it kind of, ever since then, any laws that have been made from it are getting more and more confusing, because they don't specifically say it's okay, because they say things like the state has a right to limit it, which is what states like Texas are doing these things. But they also have opened it up and said, well, there's nothing that really doesn't qualify. If a woman doesn't want the baby, she doesn't want the baby. So it's gotten more and more confusing the more that they've tried to clear it up.
The interpretation creates so many different issues.
It does. It's crazy. Like, you know, if the Supreme Court decides to take up this issue again, like, I feel like no matter what they do, they're going to confuse it further. Like, I have zero faith that anything they say, no matter which way they go with it, that we're going to have any more clarity on what the official rule of law is supposed to be. What do you guys think?
No, I don't think they will. I don't think they'll make a definitive, this is it, it's not changing. I think if anything, their decision will just define more strongly what a state can do in terms of restriction. But I don't think the Supreme Court will ever say definitively yes or no.
No, I think they're intentionally vague often.
Because the Supreme
is that the best for the country, though? I mean, since some
No.
people are so in disagreement, is it best to just leave it vague and leave it? Like,
No.
Could this somehow be an opening to maybe miraculously they come to some understanding that the need for abortion is a natural one, and that that they should clarify it or something? Would that help the country?
I think it would for sure to have that answer, but I think we have to look at the role of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court the purpose of the Supreme Court is to determine constitutionality. So if they can, with each thing, decide, like Roe v. Wade, they decide, okay, a woman has a constitutional right to have an abortion under whatever circumstances at the point. It's the 24 weeks. What is it? What does Roe v. Wade say?
It's through the second trimester.
Right.
I
It's
believe
24.
that was extended though by another case later on. So they actually got rid of the trimester. I believe now it's up to fetal viability is what most states default to, which can range. And based on current technology, fetal viability, some argue, is as early as about 18 months. I think I didn't write it down here, but I think the record or something for like a baby living outside the womb was something like 19 weeks or something. 19 weeks or something like that. Like that, most babies will die without help after that.
Right.
I mean, before that.
And so, I mean, yeah, like the Supreme Court will continue to decide if something is constitutional. But I think in terms of getting into the real nitty gritty of abortion rights, I think it will be one of those that just continually gets passed on to the states. Kara, can you tell us a little bit about like what the real statistical reality of abortions is?
Yeah, and I think this is, kind of important to at least touch on before we start heading into wrapping it up, especially since, we're going to be injecting a bit of opinion in the wrap up. So according to the Guttmacher Institute, in 1996, and some of these have been mentioned a little bit throughout the episode, but here it is kind of all in one swoop. There was an estimated 1,360,000 abortions performed. And in 2020, there were 893,000 abortions. So we've actually seen quite a steady decline since 1996, occasionally some spikes, but really it's quite a decline. And in some places, unfortunately, that is attributed to states passing barriers and laws intended to make abortion difficult to access. But more so, experts really believe that the decline that we see is attributed to a myriad of explanations, which could include, changes around abortion attitudes and stigma, contraceptive use, sexual activity, infertility, and then self-managed abortions. So, of course, that would be an unreported abortion. We talked about this too, that access to birth control is really the number one way to prevent unwanted pregnancy, but it's not foolproof. And I mentioned earlier that in 2014, and this is a common number we're seeing every year, 51% of women having abortions used birth control during the month they became pregnant. So that really, again, that really kind of shuts down that argument of, well, if they'd just been careful, they wouldn't get pregnant. And again, it doesn't negate the fact that even if a woman gets pregnant because she and her partner, right, it's not just a woman, her and her partner were not taking precautions, women really should be able to decide whether or not they're prepared to have a child. And if nothing you heard today is enough to challenge your beliefs on abortion, according to the Pew Research Center, over half of Americans, 59% to be exact, believe abortion should be legal in all or most circumstances. So there's that whole democracy thing at play. But honestly, you guys, we've talked about so much today, and what does it all mean? What does this tell us, and why is it important to know the history of abortion? Well, first off, it dispels the persistent myth that America has a religious and political tradition of decrying abortion. Little early American history resonates with the pro-life doctrine that condemns all abortions alike on the grounds that a fertilized egg is already a baby. That's just not part of the narrative of early America. It also means, as argued by Reagan, and I agree, the abortion debate is really an ideological struggle over the position of women. How free should they be to have sexual experiences in or out of marriage without paying the price of pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood? How much right should they have to consult their own needs, interests, and well-being with respect to childbearing or anything else? And are we correct to correlate anti-abortion activity with periods of high anxiety about feminism and radicalism generally? I mean, is that why we're seeing all of this conversation in America right now? Is this really about controlling a narrative of women and erasing the bloody history that spilled out of the clinics and into back alleyways when abortion was originally outlawed? And are the same people who want to force women to carry out the dangerous medical procedure of pregnancy and childbirth ready to have conversations about what to do with that child after it's born? I mean, are we prepared to overhaul the social safety net so that it includes massive resources for childcare, family access to, free and affordable healthcare, free lunches at school, and counseling for parents that are not ready to have children? Or does a child's life only matter when it's tied to a woman's body and her ability to choose whether or not to undergo a pregnancy? If this is the case, what I just mentioned above, an accurate historical summary of abortion and the statistical reality of what abortion looks like is not going to be enough to fight the current assault on abortion rights. So what I've gathered from all of this is that it's either time for a new generation to take the lead, or it's time for the Supreme Court to do their duty and make sure that they are shaping abortion law based off of the facts and the right a woman has over her body, not what the patriarchy and modern religious ideologies have tried to lay down as doctrine. Because really what I got when it comes down to it is that the origins of outlawing abortion is nothing more than a very successful marketing scheme cooked up by falsely constructed gender ideals for women, power-hungry doctors, and white supremacists.
Wow.
Oh, I just got like chills from that last paragraph. Kara, well done.
I agree. And you know, I think I remember hearing that the word woman doesn't appear in the Constitution. Do you guys know about that?
Yeah, I don't think so, because it's just person or man.
Well, and my point with that is, if that's true, any law about women has to mean that the Constitution needs to be flexible, because, you know, as we come to grips with this idea that historically women have been so marginalized, and we start to change toward equality in the genders, things in the Constitution can't be so rigid and unmovable. It wouldn't make sense, because it would only be about men, and women are citizens too, and they have the right to fight for what they believe in. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I've always been somebody that thought that the Constitution is useless if it means that the majority of people are living in fear or in feeling oppressed by the country, and that the only way that America makes sense is if it constantly is changing, adapting to what we need today, so that the majority of people can feel like they matter, and who they are is visible and equal in the eyes of the law. So, I mean, to me, it's an easy thing. Like, let's keep the ideas of the Constitution, but let's move it to a more modern place. What do you guys agree? Do you think that something about the Constitution naturally protects women? Do you think that it kind of ignored women? Do you think it should be flexible?
Yeah, I mean, for both, yes. I think one, and I'm gonna make my once per episode West Wing reference. There
we need to have a sound cue. Okay, from here on. Okay, you got to come up with a sound cue. You're going to come up with it later and insert it right now.
Ladies and gentlemen, the West Wing.
Okay, every time that plays,
ladies and gentlemen, the West Wing.
A West Wing reference is about to happen. It is. Just like in the old children's books.
So
okay?
There's an episode of The West Wing where Ainsley Hayes, who is a white blonde, as they would say in the show, bombshell Republican. She is an associate counselor for the White House, and they're talking about some kind of a bill that, you know, guarantees some kind of like rights voting, whatever it is, for women, and she's against it, and they can't figure out why she's against it. Like, don't you want these rights guaranteed for women? Why are you against this? And she says, the 14th Amendment already does that for me. I am a citizen of the United States. Mm-hmm. I'm protected. That's all I need. I don't need anything else. And I think that's a great example of what you were saying, is the Constitution protects all. So we don't need that extra thing, because if you're going to read it as is, including everybody, then it already protects them. But with that, I say yes to both, because amendments are amendments for a reason. The Constitution is made to be amended. That's the founders built a foundation. You build on top of that foundation. So we have the Bill of Rights.
And what about the things that don't apply to men, though? You know, I mean, like, you could say it's for everyone, but what about the things that are only really women's issues? Like, if you don't mention women in the Constitution, how can you cover them without mentioning them? Like, and doesn't that mean we need an amendment?
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Yeah, like that. That's what I'm saying, is where, although there are circumstances where the Constitution in itself does automatically cover everybody, but for instances of women's voting rights, for instances of the enslavement and disenfranchisement of people of color, we needed to make amendments to adjust to include them in the Constitution. So, like I said, yes for both, because the Constitution in many ways does automatically cover everybody. We do need that flexibility for circumstances like this, circumstances like slavery, circumstances like disenfranchisement of people of color and women. We need that flexibility.
And are there not, one more thing though, are there not going to be instances though where the original intent of the founding fathers was wrong? Like, it wasn't they forgot to put it in there. It's that they didn't believe it, like, isn't there going to be, and hasn't there been things that we've had to change because it was like, wait a minute, Black people are people. They're not property, and things like that, that they didn't forget to put it in there. They couldn't agree to put it in there. And a lot of them certainly didn't even believe it at the time. So like, I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, the reason I ask is I think amendments are often seen as things that we add, but only if the intent was there. But I think we also need to think of amendments as things that apply to us now and our current understanding that fly in the face of what they believed back then. And I think that's okay. That's perfectly okay for America to move forward.
I mean, I understand what you guys are saying, and I feel like I probably made my opinions maybe a little too clear, but yeah, it's very bizarre to be a woman in the middle of this argument and to be like, well, you guys, you're talking about us over here. Like, it's just weird. It seems like so many people having this argument don't have a dog in the fight. And I'm anxiously anticipating watching this play out, especially being a Texan woman. Mm-hmm. It's bizarre. And I hope that the sane and the right, judgments do play out in the courts. Because again, when we really boil things down, if you take out the opinion and the religion and the feelings, what you're left with is women being able to make decisions about their own body and consult with their doctors without someone butting their nose into it.
And on that note, we're going to call it a wrap for this episode. Yeah, I mean, like I said, this was a heavy hitter coming back into it. Kara, I want to thank you. Like you just said, I can't imagine how weird it is when Curtis and I are sitting here debating the inclusion of women in the Constitution.
I appreciate it.
And we're actively talking about you, a woman, so going into this episode.
The good fat boys.
We're doing what we can. Going into this episode, I was very stressed and like particularly nervous about how to do this. And I remember we asked you, Kara, to head this episode for us. And yeah, I mean,
job.
It's a big conversation to have.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all being so prepared for it and being so open.
So there we go. Hopefully you like this episode. We're going to be coming back to you with part 2, looking at abortion rights in America. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about modern times, what we've seen in recent years and what things are looking like in our legal landscape today, to give you a more perspective on what we're looking at right now. So if you want to get a hold of us, send us an email at pwbnetwork@gmail.com. Check us out on the Facebooks and everything. And also Spotify, they now do ratings on the app. So when you listen, give us a rating, give us however many stars, 5 preferably. And just let us know what you think. It helps us out to know what we're doing right, what we're not doing right. So with that, we'll talk to y'all in the next episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Social Discord, part of the Podcast Without Borders Network. You can get a hold of us by sending us an email at pwbnetwork@gmail.com. You can also check out our website
at podcastwithoutborders.com.